Yay, quadratics! We're in the middle of a section of solving quadratics. You've already learned to solve by graphing, or you have a little work to do. And the star of the show today is going to be solving by factoring. And we'll come back to this checklist as we go through this video, but to solve by factoring, you're going to follow these three steps, and the answer for x is going to come when you answer this question: what x value makes the parentheses inner guts equal to 0? This will all make sense as we go through some examples. So as they say on the show Letterkenny, pitter patter, let's get at her. So if I'm going to solve by factoring, I look at this quadratic equation and it's in standard form. The exponents go from exponent to 2, exponent to 1, or no exponent, and then no exponent. So we have a descending order of exponents. So it's standard form set equal to 0. We could graph that thing and look for x-intercepts and we would have the answer by graphing. But what we're going to do is we're going to turn this into factored form, and once I have it in factored form, it's going to be really easy to solve, probably easier than graphing. One small detail though, you have to remember how to factor. Zoinks! So here I have two equations. They're two separate problems, but they're both in factored form. Once I'm in factored form, it's so easy to get the answer. I'll show it to you and we'll talk about this statement down here. But the answer to this factored form is x equals -5 and x equals +7. Now I bet you're seeing a pattern right off the bat. Let's go over here. If I look at this one, the answer is x equals 4 and x equals -8. Those are the two answers that make that equation work. Now how did I get that? You have a suspicion, but basically I look at each parentheses and I say, what x value makes the parentheses inner guts equal to 0? Well, what x would make an x plus 5 equal 0? It's a -5, because a -5 plus a 5 equals 0. That's why that's one of the answers. What x value would make the inner guts x minus 7 equal 0? Well, that's a 7, because 7 minus 7 equals 0. If I put a 4 in here, that equals 0. Thus 4 is an answer. If I put a -8 in here, that equals 0. Thus -8 is an answer. So it's as easy as that, but I'm going to show you why this works. So we'll just look at this one. The thing I'm going to show you here is going to work with all of these, but as long as you trust the process, you don't need to go through with what we're going to do here. I said -5 was an answer. Well, if it really is an answer, if I plug it into the parentheses, it should make this equal 0. Well, here we go. I take a -5 and I plug it in. That's -5 plus 5. I have to plug it in for that x too. That's -5 minus 7. So this equation is rewritten with the -5's for x. This part equals 0. This part equals -12. 0 times -12 is 0. 0 equals 0. That tells me my answer is correct. Let's take a look at the 7. I can go through plugging the 7 into here, but I can do it very informally. Just look at this. If I take that 7 and I plug it in here, that's 12. If I take the 7 and plug it in here, that's 0. 12 times 0 is 0. That's telling me that 7 really does work. So you can always check yourself, but the thing that's going to go through your brain to get the answer is this: what x value makes the inner guts equal to 0? Got a couple of fresh ones here. If I take a look at this, I see an x equals -5 would make that become a 0. What would make this become a 0? That would be an x equals 2. And when I have something that's not in a parentheses, sometimes that drives people crazy. It's actually so easy, it's hard. I go ahead and I put a parentheses around there, and then I say, what x value would make this inner guts equal 0? Well, a 0 would make an x equal 0. So that one's so easy that people are hesitant to write down those answers. Let's look over here. As I look at this one, I can start here. I know x equals -1 will make that inner guts become a 0. Now I take a look at this one, and I can just kind of do a little mental math and say x equals 4 is the answer that makes that inner guts become a 0, because 2 times 4 is 8, 8 minus 8 is 0. But if I didn't feel comfortable doing that, then I can just literally write this on paper. How can I make 2x minus 8 equals 0? And then I can solve that just like a regular equation. 2x equals 8 because I move the 8 to the other side. I divide each side by 2 and I get x equals 4. So I can do it just by mental estimation, or I can literally set up an equation. Now I have a 3x outside here. I'll put a parentheses around there. What x value makes 3 times x equals 0? That's x equals 0. All right, so I've got those. We're going to do one more in factored form. It's the one down here, and this is slightly a trap. For this parentheses right here, I would get -5. For this parentheses, I would get +2. And for this, you'd say, well, Mr. Hewlin told me that's x equals 0, that's x equals 0. So you'd be tempted to write down x equals 0, but this is where the trap is. Is there an x in there? There's not. It's just a 2. If it's just a 2, there is no x value that's going to make that become a 0, so there's no answer that goes with that because there's no x in there. So what we've just looked at is how can I solve the equation if it's already in factored form. But what happens if it comes to us in standard form or not in standard form? What do we do? Let's look at this one first. It's already in standard form, but hey, I can factor this. The leading coefficient is 1, so I get to use this idea. What two numbers multiply to -35 and add to -2? You remember that stuff, right? So I could list out a bunch of numbers, but my mind sees that a -7 and a 5 multiply to that, and a -7 and a 5 combine to that. So that means I can factor this whole piece, the left side, x minus 7, x plus 5 equals 0. And as soon as I've done that, I've turned standard form into factored form, and now it's so easy to get my answer. Ta-da! Now if I look at this one over here, it's not in standard form. The exponents are descending from largest to smallest. Here I've got something over on the other side, and I need it to be a 0 on the other side for this technique to work. So I take the 32 and I move it to the other side. It's a +32, so I do subtract 32. Notice there's no like terms. There's no other integers over here for this to combine to. So if I can't combine it with like terms, it's actually easier. I just write it. Now I have that in standard form, set equal to 0. That means if I can factor this thing, getting the answer is going to be darn easy. And I say, what, stupid bells, what two numbers multiply to -32 but add to +4? So in my mind, a +8 and a -4 do the trick. These two multiply to that, these two add to +4. So now I have factored form, and once I have factored form, getting the answer, darn easy. The hardest part might be the thing from the previous chapter when we were actually factoring. Hey, here's a factoring from the past. Two terms subtracted, and I can square root both of those. That's the difference of two squares factoring, where I can follow this pattern. And once I followed that pattern, getting the answer, woohoo, easy. We'll end with this doozy. This is a mess. It's not in standard form, that's for sure. So I'm first of all going to rearrange it to standard form. I move the +4x and the +2 to the other side by doing a subtract. And I've lined it up with their like terms. So now I would rewrite this. Oh, 2 minus 2 is 0, so I don't have to write anything there. And these all equal 0. So now I have standard form. It's only two terms, but it doesn't fit the pattern of the difference of two squares. But wait a second, there's GCF. I should always think of GCF. So if I factor out a 4x, I get that. Remember, you can always check yourself. If I swoosh back in here with distribution, I should end up back there. Well, from this form, I know the x equals 3 will make that inner guts become 0. And I can think of there being a parentheses around there, and x equals 0 will make that become a 0. So these are my two answers. So what we've just done is we've done solve by factoring. You'll get the exact same answers you would get as if you were solving by graphing. It's just a different technique. And remember, when you're doing this, you're going to follow this pattern, follow those 3 steps, and when you need to get an answer for x, you just say, hey, what x values make the parentheses inner guts equal 0?